Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our Modern Girls podcast. I'm Anushka,
I'm Nita.
and we have some very special guests with us today.
Today we have with us three of our seniors who have inspired us throughout our middle school and high school journey. I think it's safe to say that Anushka and I have always strived and wanted to be exactly like them. They've been passionate about what they do, they've been passionate about the way they present themselves and the way they lead various initiatives in school. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Shrishti Ghosh, Sreesha Ghosh, and Adiba Ejaz.
Hi, guys.
Hello, thank you
Hi.
so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
It really means a lot to us that you guys came on board for this because when we honestly started the Modern Girls podcast and we thought of the idea of girls from the school community inspiring other girls, for us, you guys were kind of what we had in mind because you had inspired us for so long. So we thought that there's definitely potential to see more inspiring people. So thank you so much.
That's too sweet. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we'll go right into the questions then. So, our first question for you guys is because it's definitely college application season. This is something that a lot of seniors are concerned about. And you guys having gone to college already, I think this is something that everyone's wondering. So, what was one of the biggest things you learned from your transition from high school to college?
So I think for me, just going to college in a completely new country, and it's not just like I go to college in New York, and that means I'm not the only person coming in from a completely new country. You have a ton of other people as well, and I think that's just taught me that I really need to like put myself out there and be friends with people who are nothing like me, in some way. And that doesn't just mean interacting with people from different cultures and different backgrounds, like that's a given, but also I think talking to people who like are vastly different in age from you. So becoming friends with your professors, or if you're in high school right now, talk to your teachers, like chat with them during your breaks and lunches or after class, and just get to know them. And I think that can really help you learn things that are outside of like scholarly pursuits, and also just become a more interesting person generally. I mean, like like being friends with my professors in college has made me wish I did that more in high school.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely think there's something to be said about becoming your own person because at the end of the day, college is like a clean slate. I sometimes feel like in high school, your identity is linked to things like your friends or academics or extracurricular, like very tangible things. But when you go to, a college, none of that is left. Like you're sort of no strings attached. So it's been nice to be in a place where you sort of independently form your own like political opinions or things like opinions on academic matters and subjects. And it sounds cliche to say like become or like come into your own, but somewhat like that.
Mine's a little bit different. I think I don't know, in high school there was always this culture of really having to succeed at everything I did. And that made me very averse to experiencing any kind of failure. And then when I did, I was just unable to deal with it. Going to Princeton has completely changed that because you're always surrounded by people that are like ridiculously talented and accomplished. And that means like failure is inevitable and it happens so often that I think I've sort of been like desensitized to it and in a good way that it doesn't like affect me as much anymore. And when I don't fail, it's like it's even nicer.
I think that's something that so many people can relate to. I think that constant strive for perfection that a lot of us have, especially towards the end of high school, is it becomes a really difficult mindset to break out of, especially when you're in, I think, a small pond. It's not that difficult to achieve as well. So I think, as you said, definitely once you're part of a much larger community and you're being challenged and seeing people who can be better than you sometimes, I definitely think, yes, that's reassuring to know. And I also think that as you mentioned, a lot of us have crafted a really strong identity for ourselves in high school, especially those of us who've been in school right from the beginning. You kind of have this entire personality that's kind of been etched out over the course of like 12 years. So I think a lot of us are scared of what's going to happen when we go to university and all of that's erased. But thank you for showing that in a more positive light. I think that's something that a lot of us can look forward to now instead of fearing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree. And Shisha's point about learning how to, deal with failure is so important because you're right. We're in a very like small group of us. There's only 100, 210 of us in our batch. And when you go to college, of course, that increases and competition increases. And it's like they say in, cliche sayings that, failure is a small speed breaker on the road to success. So speaking about school and how we've grown and how things have changed when you went to college. Now, at Modern, we learn a very strong set of core values, and I think that it makes us who we are, especially for for those of us that have been there, let's say, since primary or even KG. So, what was one thing that you learned from GEMS Modern Academy that has helped you settle into college with a lot more confidence?
I definitely think you're right, and there's a set of core values that is sort of ingrained in you. You hear in Dubai also that it's a modern kid thing, you know. But I think at the end of the day, for me, it was more about taking initiative. It's kind of what Adiba was saying before about like reaching out to people, and I think it definitely with professors and teachers, but also with friends, even if it was like sending a text to somebody first to create that relationship, or I set up like a baking club because I couldn't find anywhere else to bake. It's just small things like that where you're more attuned to creating opportunities for yourself because you're not scared of taking that initiative. So that's been really helpful for me.
I think for me, it's just like the very strong work ethic that modern inculcates in you. And obviously that comes with its fair share of downsides, like, occasionally overworking yourself. But I don't know, like at Princeton, even if classes are really tough, I'm just grateful that I have the ability to like throw myself into a challenge if it arises and have a little bit of like security in the fact that I will be able to work through it. I like often say this to my dad, but there's like no knowledge, no piece of knowledge or no skill that I'm 100% confident about, except the fact that I can work really hard at something and that I wouldn't have without more.
Yeah, I think so. Like mine actually has a little bit of a connection with the previous question. And I think modern taught me how to deal with being confused and failing sometimes miserably at a lot of things in college in a way that I don't think I would have gotten at a different high school. And that has, I mean, I hear your, like, I think it's a very good point that it's a smaller pond in high school. But at the same time, I feel like I went to high school with a lot of talented people as well. And I don't necessarily think that the gap between like a college pool and a high school pool is necessarily that different, especially when we remind ourselves that, a lot of getting into college isn't necessarily being like smarter than other people or more talented than other people. It's also just a lot of luck and a lot of circumstances that are completely out of your control. And I think modern, in a similar way, had like a random pool of very, very smart people, or like people who were great at sport, or people who were great at singing. And that brought with it a lot of opportunities as well to do things. So I would apply for these things and I would just not get them. Or like I would suck at doing them when I'm, in the process of trying. And I think that kind of failure has just made me go into college ambitious, but not ambitious to the extent of overworking myself, or realizing, well, I mean, there's always this idea that I think a lot of women especially have, that you want to be secure about your future and you want to prove yourself to other people. And I think I've sort of just grown out of that mindset eventually. And I think now it's like equally important to live in all periods of time at the same time. You don't just have to think about the future, also think about the present and like reflect on the past and just be okay with, I mean, not being the best at everything.
That's such a valuable lesson to anyone watching, especially at people like Anushka and I from our batch who are going to go into college very soon. And I think Shisha's point about, work ethic, the work ethic that's modern inculcates in us is so very important because it's during application season when we understand how well we're able to manage our time because we've always had a lot of things going on at the same time. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
And I particularly resonated with Adiba's point because I recently watched, I think it was a TED talk by Reshma Sarjani, where she was like, teach girls bravery and not perfection. Because I think that this is a trait that a lot of girls have. I think a few boys have as well, that as Adiba said, we like to be secure about the future. We're not that comfortable with taking risks unless we know that we have all of our things in order. We aren't really willing to push ourselves. But I think in modern, you definitely have this sort of spirit of pushing yourself to go for different things, even if that's not necessarily something you've done or that's in your comfort zone. I definitely do think that modern is a community that pushes you to try different things, because you're just surrounded by people with such various interests that sometimes even in just pursuit of sticking with your friend group, you might find yourself trying to do something completely different. So I definitely think that's one of modern's strong qualities. So thank you so much for bringing that up. So our next question is, do you think your views on sexism have changed as a result of your interactions with people from diverse backgrounds and cultures, since you've recently gone and studied abroad? And I think all the universities that you guys have gone to are really like melting pots of culture. I think you meet a lot of different people. So has interacting with different perspectives kind of changed your views on feminism and sexism?
I don't know if they've changed my views so much as just deepened them in its scope. I think what I took away from meeting people from different backgrounds and different cultures, and especially like different experiences, is how I myself internalize different elements of sexism that I think are okay, because I've just been around people that also believe it and also believe that it's okay, and then meeting someone different and realizing that, you know, this is a problem, is just really enlightening. Like, I think one of the more recent experiences I had was talking to someone who brought up that like this like drive for ethical sustainability can often be like a form of sexism on its own, because you never see like men talking to each other about, you know, buying cars with good gas mileage or something. It's always like targeted for a relatively female audience about buying sustainable fashion or buying sustainable makeup or eating healthy, sustainable food. And while we should all strive towards sustainability, I think it's interesting that like so much of the burden is like put on women. And that's something I never considered before, you know, talking to someone with very different experiences. So that's what it's done to me.
So I think I've had a similar experience as Sreesha, and that I don't know if I've fundamentally like redefined sexism for myself in college, but I feel like it's made it more new. Like my interpretation of it is now more nuanced and a little bit, well, like significantly more complex. And I think um a new development in feminist theory is this idea of intersectional feminism. And this was just a word that was kind of floating in my head in high school, but coming into college, I actually see what it manifests like, right? So women aren't a monolith, and not all women have a similar experience of sexism. And a lot of that is informed by like their class, their race. And I think like, see, I mean, at Modern, you were more or less surrounded by people who came from like a similar background of wealth and a similar like racial identity, right? And that changes a lot when you go to college. And as a result of that, what also changes is your understanding of these like inequalities and how much they inform each other. And especially talking to like professors, and I'm also in a club which has like graduate students from around the country, right? And talking about how economic factors, like having to work for a wage, for example, which is a fundamental part of what you have to do right now. You can't live in society without working, and how that, in particular, is like a form of economic oppression that might, you know, inform or interact with sexism in a very meaningful way. So like understanding those social structures, um, and talking to people and understanding what their cultural experiences and their how their background has informed the sexism they experience, like that's been my means of development. But I couldn't give you like a general statement on, you know, this has changed in this way.
I agree with that also. I think that's super important. And it sort of shows you why it's so key to be exposed to different cultures. And I sometimes think, as much as men do, women also have a tendency to sort of internalize this idea that it's part of the culture. It's okay. I was born and brought up with this, and so this is what is expected of me. I must continue down this path, etc., etc. And because that path differs differently for so many women, depending on their cultural background, their socioeconomic background, this exposure to different cultures means that I'm able to compare my experiences or my beliefs with somebody else. They're able to compare theirs with mine, etc. And so I think that's important because it creates a discussion around why are we doing what we're doing, and do we really need to be feeding into these potentially sexist practices in society and things.
Absolutely. I think at quite a few levels, I do think sexism has sort of been normalized in our community. And I think the first time we sort of encountered this idea was when one of our friends, Amanda, wanted to write an article on hypervigilance. And we had no idea what hypervigilance was, but we still kind of said, go for it, because she truly believed in what she had to say. And it was just about how the idea of how girls, when we're walking around at streets and we tend to like look, the other way and make sure that there's no man following us, so that we refuse to go out at certain times of night and that we refuse to go out to certain areas, are technically a form of oppression, and it is actually a mental illness, because that sort of staying in constant high alert can lead to anxiety at quite a few situations. So she'd written this article about how this had actually led to a mental illness, and none of us had ever thought about that, because just checking the road had become so normalized for us. But I think when Srisha brought up the thing about ethnic sustainability, like I would never have even imagined that in my wildest dreams, because as she said, it had always been in my head as, going for sustainable fashion, avoiding fast fashion, things like that. I'd never realized that, yes, that is something that's being marketed primarily towards women. So I think when you really boil down to certain core issues, you realize that it's really embedded in our system, certain concepts of sexism. And sometimes what Nida and I have grappled with a lot is that there are so many issues. When we discover them, we want to talk about them, but we don't want to be sort of accused of nitpicking or sort of having an issue with everything, or sort of, shifting focus away from big issues and then focusing on these small ones, which focus a smaller section of society. But I think, as you said, when you expose yourself to a lot of different people, I think understanding that there's so many different ways of looking at a situation, of looking at this issue as a whole, is really important to explore.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to comment on something you said. Like the problem of being accused of nitpicking, you really shouldn't worry about that. And I think what you guys are doing is really great in highlighting like specific minor issues that aren't talked about, because that's sort of critical thought and like actually pointing out negatives in society. I mean, even if people call you a pessimist or a cynic or whatever, it really doesn't matter. And I think what you guys are doing is great. So what you guys are doing is great. So like, don't let that get to you.
Yeah, I just want to say it probably affects women more. Like you will rarely ever hear somebody tell your male counterparts in school that you're nitpicking or you're being dramatic, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something you're actively fighting against, and you should fight against, because you deserve to highlight these things, and it's important.
Absolutely. I think what Srishti said made a lot of sense, because a lot of the times, people just say that, oh, this is how you are. This is just, like Adiba said, you're cynical and you're always whining and complaining about everything. But I think the best part about starting Girl Up was that we saw a lot of our friends' perspectives, and male friends' perspectives, change over the last 6-7 months, and them realize that, okay, what they say and how they say the things that they say really make a difference and really matter to a lot of us. So talking about changing perspectives and changing views when it comes to issues regarding women and sexism, have you had a first-hand experience with someone discriminating against you, or being rude to you, or telling you that you can't do something just because you're a girl? And if you have, then how did you deal with the situation?
I love that you add this part to the question about how I dealt with the situation, because I think often enough, I mean, I personally just tend to like roll my eyes and just let something pass. And that's a bad thing. I don't like that I do that, and I'm trying to get over it more recently. But I feel like so I'm a math major, right? And I've known that I wanted to do something in STEM since like the fourth grade probably. And all through you so like I took IB HR physics, and I was 1 out of 11 girls in my class. I mean, one girl out of 11 people or so in my class. And that sort of that isn't always like a direct statement that I can't, do STEM, but it feels very alienating. It feels like you're the odd one out in some way, and that sort of discrimination is something that a lot of other girls in the world are experiencing firsthand, right? You get told that you can't do physics or that you can't do math. And I, in my time, met people in high school who actually intellectualized this. And they were people who think that, women can't do geometry very well because back in the day, um, men were like gatherers and hunters, and women stayed at home and like made meals in the caveman days. And somehow evolutionarily those traits have been preserved over time. So in your time, both at college and in high school, you'll meet like intellectual anti-feminists who rationalize these things and think they have, well, really they're getting most of their arguments from Jordan Peterson. And I think that sort of like intellectual um, like reaction against feminism is something that's really, really toxic right now. And I think that's something that I've had to experience in the past, like arguing with people my age who think that they're making actual scientific arguments against women being good at math and women being good at like science. And the way in which I deal with that is honestly just like reasoning it out with them and showing them why objectively, like in that process of argument, they're wrong. And in addition to that, like also I think it's important to get more women to ignore them and follow their own passions in like math or science. And right now I'm working with this nonprofit called Superposition, with which I just like, we have like speakers come over, talk about issues women are facing in STEM. We have like little coding sessions and classes and stuff directed at women. And I think it's important to tackle it on both ends, like both encourage women to join these fields, as well as with like reason and patience combat the anti-feminist reaction to it.
Adiba, if I could ask you just one follow-up question. So when you try to reason with people your age, have you had any experiences where they're just not willing to listen and they just keep pushing their own opinion on you? And how did you deal with that kind of response?
All right, so I like to make an example out of it. And basically when you hear that in a similar argument, right, they will accuse women in general of being irrational and like being emotional while arguing and not listening and not being rational. So you kind of just make an example out of them at that point and show them how they are an example of the category of women that they criticize. And that's like a clever way to get out of it at the moment, and it can be quite provocative. And if anything, that can make them think about their biases. So that's a good way of getting out of it. Otherwise, if they just aren't listening, it's really not on you to keep defending women as a whole. And I think individual women to put a lot of pressure on themselves in that aspect. So just walk away or ignore them or like mock them even, if that helps you.
Thank you. I think that's a really good way of dealing with that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's important that when Adiba said that it's like not your responsibility after a certain point, I think it shouldn't even be your responsibility from the very beginning. But the sad reality is that if women don't do it individually, it's probably not going to change a lot of things. I think my experience is also kind of in that microaggression realm where it's not necessarily as explicit. I have too many anecdotes to prove the fact that I've been a very sort of assertive, confident, little strong-headed girl from a very young age. And I think that's never really, my parents have always encouraged that. I feel like I wouldn't know who I am without that kind of quality inside of me, but that's also meant that even through high school, I was the intimidating or the aggressive, sort of, it's weird because any male counterpart of mine who had the same qualities or who featured the same personality traits were suddenly like, he's a good leader, he's got his head on his shoulders and he deserves his position. Whereas mine was more like, sure, but she's very intimidating, or maybe she could just like tone it down a little, and I also debated through high school. I still continue to debate, which is probably another sort of aspect to my personality that adds to that. And I think that's one thing that I've always struggled with this expectation of me that I would be more quote unquote feminine, empathetic, quiet, not as assertive probably. But really the way that I've dealt with it is it's key to my identity, and probably coming with that strong-headedness is me realizing that I'm not going to change that for a lot of people. So it's probably just being who I am, and hopefully that will in itself change opinions on what a woman should or can do, in general.
Honestly, I can't think of like a singular specific instance of gender discrimination. I feel like there are much smaller things. That I think I lived a fairly sheltered life where I haven't faced too much of it, and B, like there are much like smaller things that are just so deeply embedded that I can't seem to extract them. But what Adiba said gave me like war flashbacks to like fighting boys in class and then like getting really heated up about it and then be like, why are you so emotional? Why are you so irrational? Call it women. But I don't know, I'm not sure I cracked how to deal with like sexist comments and jokes either. But I once read this thing that I really want to try out about how when somebody cracks a sexist joke, you just like ask them like why it's funny. Like you don't understand it. It like stumps them completely. So haven't had the chance to try it out, but would really like to someday.
I think I've seen that one as well. I think it was a Tumblr post that I'd seen across and I'd wanted to try that as well. But I think after starting Girl Up, I've not really heard a lot of sexist jokes being cracked around me for some reason. But I really think what Srishti and Adiba said really resonated with me. As Adiba said, I think the IB physics class example is just resonated so much with me because I'm also in IB physics HL. And I think it's not as bad as having 1 out of 11. I think it's a little better, but even then, there's a somewhat really, I don't really know how to explain it, but it's almost as if boys kind of feel as if they have a claim over the subject, as if you're not really meant to be the one there and you're not really meant to be the one interacting, and they don't want to like, you know, work with the girls when we're working through sums or working through things. And I think that really comes down to this sort of stereotype that's marketed towards girls and boys both actually about what is considered a masculine subject and what is considered a feminine subject, because often STEM subjects are considered more masculine in nature. And that's a really sort of idea because especially for me, my mom was a computer engineer. I'd always seen her as like, you know, this big bad, you know, computer engineer. She's always typing away. And coming to school and then seeing that that's not really how everyone else perceives things, and how people were saying that, you know, even if you want to take a science subject, you should take things like biology and chemistry because that's a little more marketed towards girls. That was a weird sort of thing to grapple with. And I think it just boils down to why certain things are connotated as masculine or feminine. Even as Srishti said about, you know, when you're being a leader, it's so easy to call a girl bossy. I think that's been like my number one hated word, that if you ever raise your voice, if you ever try to tell someone anything, then you're marked as bossy. But if a boy does it, he's like, oh, he's a good leader. He knows how to take charge. I think rejecting the idea of masculinity and femininity in the sense that rejecting the stereotypes that are associated with it and acknowledging that there can definitely be leaders who can be aggressive and can still be feminine, and that there are boys who can be, you know, soft-spoken and still be masculine. I think that is something that really has to be revisited, and that's something that you see a lot in school, as you said, in the form of microaggressions. But yeah, I think that's definitely something that's been a part of all of our school experiences. So thank you for
adding on to what Anushka said with subjects like chem and bio. And so I've known that I wanted to become a healthcare professional. So let's say maybe a psychologist or a doctor from a very young age. Just like Adiba said, I think it was the 5th or 6th grade. And whenever I tell anyone my future plans, all the people back home especially be like, oh yeah, medicine, that's a very good career for a girl. That added for a girl always shocked me because I was like, why does it make a difference? And then when I grew up, I understood what they said in terms of, oh, you know, there's not much, you don't have to go do field work and you just have to sit and prescribe medicines. And even surgery for that matter is considered a very masculine sort of a field wherein, you know, I had this experience. I was in a hospital with my mom and my mom was going in for surgery next. And the person before her actually was refusing to get his surgery done by a female surgeon. And that was a very eye-opening experience for me, because when we think of surgery, we think of, okay, how competent the doctor is and how they've performed throughout their career. But just the fact that a surgeon is a female and that makes you not want to get surgery, it's very, very shocking.
I'm sorry you had to see that, and I'm sorry that that kind of thing still exists in society today. I think it comes down really to what we can do to change that. And I don't know, I feel sort of disheartened when I realize that the reality is that, you know, female surgeons have to fight that kind of thing, or other healthcare professionals like you, hopefully, will, you know, have to sort of be challenged by. And I think that's, yeah, disheartening to hear, but hopefully things like this will change how people view them. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think, Shrishti, as you said, the method that a lot of people propagate is sort of showcasing role models for girls in those particular fields, so that that stereotype of this being a male dominated field, even if it is sort of gets broken down because you're saying, look, there are girls in this field, or there are women who are really doing well in this particular industry. So I think, and as I said, even for myself, seeing my own mom at home was such a big inspiration for me to get into STEM, because my whole life I'd never thought of it as being a field that was unwelcoming for me, because I had that inspiration at home. So likewise, have there been any role models for you either at home or at school that have really inspired you or that you've looked up to? And
I
what has
think
been their
Yeah, I think there's, as a woman, especially, that there's always going to be women you look up to, especially if they're, being ambitious in their field or doing anything that you think is worthy, or, worth noting. For me, like you said, it's probably my mom. It's just started from a very young age. And so I've just always looked up to her. I know, at least around me, there have always been conceptions of whether or not a woman should work, and especially after having twins and things like that. And so I'm really proud of the way that she's balanced being such a great, I don't even want to say homemaker, because she does so much more than that, but that along with working and succeeding in her field and being where she is and being the only woman at the table she currently sits in and things like that. And for all of the I'm too bossy and intimidating comments I get, they primarily come from my mom and her inspiration to like stay strong and be who you are. And if that means challenging people or being strong-headed and assertive and confident, then that's what it is. And so I've really taken that away from her. I think that's her impact on me.
Yeah, I will second that. I I don't know, we just always grew up thinking that it was completely normal for like a woman to be able to have both, home, a family, and a career, and it was just never even a question in our minds as to like, would you have to sacrifice one for the other. So definitely always looked up to my mom for how ambitious and autonomous she is. But I wanted to say that one of my other role models is Toshko ma'am. We had a really good relationship in school. But I don't know, there's something about how comfortable she is in herself. Like she, doesn't really care what anyone thinks. And I also really admire, like, I think some women feel like they need to masculinize them. There's them need to masculinize themselves in order to be accepted as someone of authority or someone that has power. And I just really admired how she could like go crazy with her hair and then like wear a sari and a blazer on top and just feel totally comfortable in how she was. And then she was the first person that I once wrote a kind of controversial essay when I was in ninth grade. And I got into a lot of trouble for it. And she was the only person, she was my supervisor at the time. She was like, she called me out. I thought I was going to get, into a lot of trouble. And she was like, I really like that essay. It reminded me of myself when I was younger. And she was like one of the first people to say it's completely okay to, call something out if you think it needs to be called out. So definitely look up to her.
Yeah. So I generally actually try to avoid having role models. Mostly because I feel like idolizing someone to some degree, you tend to ignore like aspects of them that you should be critical of. And that's something I don't want to fall into. But I would say that someone who played an important part in my development in high school was actually one of our school librarians, Miss Srividya Devanand. I don't know if she's still in Modern, but I remember like in the 10th grade, right, when everyone was going crazy with board exams, including myself, I would sometimes go to the library in our zero period, and I found it to be like a place of sanctuary. And I would ask her, I would like go up to her to get my books checked out, and sometimes she would comment on the books I'm getting. And she ended up recommending this book to me called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I don't know anything about motorcycles, and I don't know anything about Zen. And the book ended up having very little to do with both of those, but it played an important part in like, it was the first ever difficult book I'd read. And it had all of these like references to like the Platonic theory of forms. And then there was this man who was suffering from all of these mental illnesses and his like intellectual journey coming out of that. So like that book sparked a series of conversations that I had with her that I think I hold with myself up until now. And to a significant degree, that experience, right? Like talking to the librarian getting book recommendations from her, and then reading her blog. And once she asked me to co-write in her blog as well, which I didn't do because I was like insecure about my writing ability or whatever. But that experience, just like having someone completely different experiences from mine. She's like not my age at all, and talking to her once a week, like learning new things. I think um that's really shaped the way I think right now, and it shaped my decision of like where to go to college and um what kind of experiences I wanted in my education.
That sounds so interesting. I think I would definitely agree with that. I think whenever we talk to Srividya ma'am in the library, I think some of the most interesting conversations come out of there. Honestly, I love reading her Twitter and her blogs because she has some really interesting things to say. And thank you for that. I mean, whenever Nida and I also try to talk about inspirational women on our page, I don't think we ever go with it so much for the notion of people to idolize them or to say, I want to be exactly like this person when I grow up, but more for the notion that they exist and that they have done something, and that if you want to do something as well, you absolutely can. It's not something that you can't. And I think just surrounding yourself with intelligent women and just having them in your life is just such a rewarding experience. So definitely.
So, to all the girls and boys for that matter watching this podcast, what would be one thing or one message that you'd like to give them?
I'm not sure. Kind of along the lines of what Adiba said. I would rather they not try to be, us at all, but just try to be themselves, and um, want like young girls to um, be confident in themselves, because I think as women we all tend to internalize sexism in that we're like more hesitant, more anxious, more critical of our own abilities and our own talents. And so I think better than looking up to anyone else or trying to constantly reach up to somebody else, I think there's a lot to be said about just looking into yourself and being confident about the person you are today and the person you will eventually, grow up into. So that's mine.
All right. So I think um, at Modern and both at college, everyone, especially women, will be exposed to a lot of stress culture, right? You have people who glorify being busy, who glorify being productive. And I mean, something as simple as like in the ninth grade, right? You're seeing a lot of people run around during break and lunch, trying to, get like, even when you don't have tasks to do, you want to get yourself tasks to do because you see everyone else doing the same thing and you want to be busy. And that makes you, you know, that's like a social pressure to do things. And I think my piece of advice would just be to spend a good amount of time each day with yourself, just doing nothing. That that's that could be really valuable and just like, I mean, I don't want to be cheesy, but getting to know yourself. And I think Srisha also mentioned, like looking inward is a really important way to find out where your priorities in life are and what you actually want to do with your future, right? And especially with all of this isolation time, I think people have been given an opportunity to do exactly that. You don't have to like surround yourself with people all the time. So just spend some time doing like a low effort, low mental activity, sort of like just listen to music or just sit down and look outside. It'll feel uneasy and strange at the outset because you're so used to being stimulated and even overstimulated at times with all of that social media stuff. So I just like spend time doing nothing and introspect. And I think that'll get you a long way in terms of understanding who you are and thinking deeply about the choices you make.
Yeah, I agree with both of them. If I was to say anything, I think for my time in school and even now my time in college, I have found a lot of solace and support from the community of women around me, and that includes Srisha and Adiba and my other friends as well. Especially the girls around me is what I'm trying to say. And so I think if we can all support each other and champion each other in whatever we're doing, I think that will always be a good support system to have and a good value to hold, especially given that we know what each other is to a certain extent, that what each other is facing and being challenged by. So yeah, just I suppose help each other out.
I think that's some amazing advice from the three of you, and each advice is so important and something that everyone can learn from. And I think after you guys graduated, you left a, you know, a
So thank you so much for joining us today. This has been such an amazing conversation. It really meant a lot for us once again for you to join us. I know we've said this a lot of times, but forgive us. Honestly, I think because we did have a batch in between us, we didn't get a chance to interact with you guys as much as we would have liked to in school. But this was really, really amazing for both of us to finally have this opportunity. So thank you so much for sharing a little bit of yourselves and your views on all of these topics with us. It meant a lot. And we hope to interact with you soon, very soon, once again.
Thank you for having us. This has been really fun.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great.